Hi, everybody. Achilles Just here with the Philosophy Society. It is December 4th, 2024. We are in the Toronto Metropolitan University Library, room 860. So I just gave a little small introduction on the Philosophy Society. So that's a different video. It'll be under that playlist. Now we're going to make our best effort to finish this chapter on synergy. We don't have that much to get through. I believe with an hour and a half, I can get it done with some time to spare, right? Okay. So what are we doing here? We're going to share our screen, force field analysis. So this is in this book, we're on page 325. And we're going to go up to 337. So there's only a few slides left. And then I'm just going to read through the section on the last part. So I'm just going to read from the slides, and then I'll read through from the book. Synergy is powerful in dealing with negative forces working against growth and change. So again, he's speaking from a business context where people are very adversarial. They're coming into these meetings or these negotiations from a win-lose perspective. Sociologist Kurt Lewin, force field analysis, performance as a state of equilibrium between driving forces encouraging upward movement and restraining forces discouraging movement. So, he's talking about properties that are going to help us grow together and cooperate and things that don't. And I guess he uses this phrase, force field analysis, and he talks about this notion of equilibrium here. So there are driving forces, which are positive, reasonable, and economic, again, business context. And there's restraining forces, which are negative, emotional, and illogical. So people getting upset. And a lot of this makes sense from a business context. People are negotiating, someone gets upset, and that's like a restraining force. It's not helping them come to an agreement. So the first example is the home climate. So he's bringing it back to the family. Degree of positivity or negativity with interactions, safety in expressing feelings and concerns, and respect. So this is the context that we want to have in how we communicate with each other. Synergy allows people to safely discuss forces to transform restraining into driving. So what we want to do is have a psychologically, quote unquote, safe environment where people can be open and they don't feel threatened. And that shifts in the notion of these forces from a restraining force where people can't communicate and express themselves into a driving force towards mutual goals. Synergy allows people to safely discuss forces to transform restraining into driving. Very good. Creation of new shared goals. So that's that synergy thing where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Slide 2, an example of an anger negotiation. Relationships were able to continue even though trust was irreparably very low. And so even if we have a negative context, if we can reorient ourselves with the driving forces, we can try to take a negative situation and make something good out of it. And then example 3, a development program. The manufacturer is being sued for lack of performance. A miscommunication led to a misunderstanding. The problem solved with interdependence of habit 4, 5, and 6. So if people's expectations of what they want from each other are different and they don't really understand what the other person is looking at, it can lead to a lot of issues, right? Whereas if we explicate and are very open about what our expectations are, then we're not going to have these problems. And we can see that through the win-win context and trying to understand the other people's perspective. With that, we can have this synergistic relation, and then we can have greater output in the end. Example 4, the bank and the developer. Developer was not following the payment schedule. Developer communicated win-win intentions to the bank and sought to understand. Once the bank officers felt understood, they were less defensive and open to listening to the developer. A mutual understanding and awareness revealed how poor communication led to misunderstanding of unrealistic expectations. Legal fight aborted, and the project continued until successful completion. And so again, going into a legal context usually isn't going to be the best unless you absolutely have to. And in this context, we were able to divert that outcome. So let's look at the text here, 325. So force field analysis.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's important to have a safe environment for people to express themselves. I want to ask psychologically, why it's so important for people to be able to express themselves?
Well, part of it is that is feeling that you're who you actually are is accepted in the group. Because if who I actually am isn't accepted here, then why am I here? And so when we talk about people feeling that they can express themselves, expression is like the outward element of identity. I'm expressing what is the innermost part of me. And so in the synergistic context, you want people to express those inner parts of them because that's where their value is. That's what makes them unique and distinct. And that's what has merit that's directly relative to them. And so if it's a psychologically unsafe environment, for example, a dictatorial leadership style where someone's like yelling like a military officer at their at the people working with them, it can be very difficult for the people there to be able to express themselves because it's almost abusive. They could get hurt. So they have to put up this wall. Or we can see in like relationships, if people are in a fight, they're not, they could use illegitimate techniques like lying or manipulating people because of the threatening context of the situation. And they're not truly able to express what's really going on. And so it's important for us to diffuse threats, right? Because that's not going to help. And there's ways that we can diffuse it in a fair and legitimate context. Like we don't have to lie. We don't have to make stuff up. But we can communicate our perspective knowing that it can be corrected. So it's like, this is what I see right now. You tell me how I can improve my perspective here or what I'm seeing. And then that can lead to a healthy dialogue.
But
okay.
But in the organization, I rarely see this kind of safe environment. For example, between a boss and its employee, or in the organization, like people are so afraid to express themselves because they're afraid of punishment, or they're afraid of they will lose the relationship that they rely on, even in an intimacy relation, or in a family when kids and parents there's a gap. They're afraid to tell their parent. The kids were afraid to tell their parents how they really feel because they feel like from their observations they may not be encouraged to share their real feeling. So there's a lot of aspects in this society that doesn't encourage people to express themselves. So I guess my question is, do you see that this kind of context or not encouraging expression is damage to people, and like even you go to like the service, government service, they will say, oh, we do not tolerate abuse language or or even challenge to our staff, whatever.
Sure.
Sometimes give me an impression that wow, I'm so afraid to express my opinion.
Well, again, like I think it's more like people yelling and name calling and being malicious. That's and the other thing, like that's what they don't want. And the other thing is that people in the service industry aren't trained like psychologically to know how to deal with people. Like they are a little bit, but they're not like they have a degree in psychology. That's not part of what it means to be engaged in customer service. The other thing too is he, in a previous chapter, I think it's maybe win-win. No, sorry, it's habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. He talks about how the manager had this picture of going to Cancun, and he had little images of the people's face in a competitive context, but then he's talking about cooperation. And he's like, well, you're not in alignment here. You're telling them one thing and then you're doing another thing, right? And so even Daniel Goleman has a book where he talks about leadership, and he fundamentally says that the person in charge has to emulate these things. That's why I'm very vulnerable, because I'm trying to show people and myself how you can be open and express yourself in a way that's like non-threatening. And David Burns goes into it too. David Burns says, like, if someone makes a valid criticism of you, it's important for you to know that. If they're just making stuff up, like a schizophrenic patient that says you're the devil, it's not it's a misplaced observation. So you don't have to be upset about it. You don't have to take it personally, right? And so I think that there's a way for us to still be vulnerable and deal with people that have issues, and Yeah, and on the other hand is if you're in a leadership position, organizational position, you have to be able to emulate that. So from a consulting perspective, if I was going to engage with an organization, it really comes down to the person that's in charge, because they need to be a role model, and then they need to emulate how to act. Now, again, everybody makes mistakes. I recently got angry and yelled at somebody in the house for vaping. It was overwhelming for me, and I got upset. In those moments, you may have lost yourself, but then upon reflection, you can say, hey, and you can accept responsibility for what occurred. I was upset. It's very difficult for me when I can't breathe clean air or whatever. And then you can talk about it. So part of it is that we accept that we're human and we make mistakes. We understand the place of emotions. But then you can respond and be proactive by saying, hey, I know this occurred. Let's find a way to manage it. And that's assuming that someone, again, is being win-win. If people are, like in my specific example here, if people are lying about vaping in the house, there's nothing you can do about that, right? You have to just remove them, because they're not coming from a win-win perspective. They're coming from a win-lose. They care about doing what they want, and they don't give a shit about you. So that's, if that's not in place, then it just has to be a no deal. If you can't work with me in a cooperative way, then you have to go.
There's another counter argument about this being vulnerable, because some people will say, yeah, there's a lot of good things about what you just mentioned, that people express themselves, but it takes a lot of time to communicate. We need efficiency here. Let's get things done. We don't have time to do all those kind of being vulnerable and communication. By the time we can listen to everybody, we probably will be very low efficiency. We miss the window. So how do you deal with this kind of counter argument?
Yeah, and so Covey talks about this in Habit 3. But first things first, he gives the example about his son breaking up with his girlfriend. And he says that the main point here is to be efficient with your schedule, but be effective with people, or efficient with your time. And if you invest a little bit of time in the moment when issues arise, you're actually preventing long-term issues occurring, right, at intervals that you don't even know. And so it's all, and he talks about the quadrant too. It's always best to take something that is important, that's not urgent, and deal with it right away. And if you find an adequate solution and you teach an individual how to manage themselves, then you won't have to go back and manage them over and over and over again. And so that's why an understanding of what the actual, and we talk about this with the criminal stuff. Like, I was doing a case study recently, and this one homeless person got himself admitted to the jail 23 times to avoid cold winters, to have a shower and to have food. So if we know it's a systemic issue that homeless people will commit very small crimes to get through the winter in the jail, it's actually better for us just to provide them housing, basic dignity things for their hygiene, and then food, right? Because then you don't have to pay guards to process them. You just have the shelter, which is already being accommodated. Like a regular shelter is actually cheaper to build than a jail. A jail is a super complicated, very difficult thing to design and to build and to maintain. So even just the shelter is going to be cheaper, right? But part of it is a misunderstanding. People try to impose things to be efficient, but they're not effective at all, and it costs way more money, right? Or time. And so, like as a parent, if you observe your child is having problems with like self-control or self-regulation, or they're getting upset, it's best to spend the time now and deal with it now so that the habit doesn't get larger and cause more problems in the future, right? And then you just have to manage yourself and say, how can I find time for it right now, and whatever. Okay, let's read through this next part here. So, interdependent situation. Synergy is particularly powerful in dealing with negative forces that work against growth and change. Sociologist Kurt Lewin talks about the force field analysis. He describes any current level of performance or being as a state of equilibrium between driving forces that encourage upward movement and the restraining forces that discourage it. Driving forces are generally positive, reasonable, logical, conscious, and economic. Juxtaposition, restraining forces are often negative, emotional, illogical, unconscious, and social, psychological. Both sets of forces are very real and must be taken into account in dealing with change. So he has this little diagram of these arrows going up and down, and there's a sense of equilibrium here. 326. In a family, there's a certain climate in the home, a certain level of positive or negative interaction, of feeling safe or unsafe in expressing feelings or talking about concerns, of respect or disrespect and communication among family members. You may want to change that level, want to create a climate that is more positive, more respectful, more open and trusting. Logical reasons for doing that are driving forces that act to raise the level. Increasing those driving forces, another way to talk about is the emotional bank account. That's very similar. Increasing those driving forces is not enough. Efforts are opposed by restraining forces, the competitive spirit between children and the family, by different scripting at home life you and your spouse have brought to the relationship, by habits that have developed in the family, by work or other demands on your time and energies. Increasing driving forces may bring results for a while. As long as the restraining forces are there, it becomes increasingly harder. Pushing against the spring, the harder you push, the harder it is to push until the force of the spring suddenly thrusts the level back down. Resulting up and down, yo-yo effect causes you to feel that people are just the way they are and it's too difficult to change. Again, this is just a misunderstanding of the causal mechanisms of what's going on. And through habit 5, letting the person discuss and express their emotions in a healthy way, we can understand why they're doing the things they're doing. And then we can implement certain tests. We can say, let's try this for a while, see how it works, and then we can modify it and move forward. Introduce synergy. Use the motive of habit 4, the skill of 5, and the interaction of 6 to work directly on the restraining forces. Create an atmosphere in which it is safe to talk about these forces. Unfreeze them, loosen them up, create new insights that actually transform those restraining forces into driving ones. Involve people in the problem, immerse them in it, soak it in, and feel it is their problem, and they tend to become an important part of the solution. So if people can have a sense of self-efficacy, then they're more likely to be motivated to want to try. If they think they're going to fail, why would they even try? As a result, new goals, shared goals are created, and the whole enterprise moves upward, often in ways that no one could have anticipated. Excitement contained within that movement creates a new culture. People involved in it are enmeshed in each other's humanity and empowered by new, fresh thinking, by new creative alternatives and opportunities. Involved in several times in negotiations between people who were angry at each other and hired lawyers to defend their positions. Exacerbate the problem because the interpersonal communication deteriorated as it went through the legal process. Trust level was so low that the parties felt they had no other alternative than to take the issue to court. Interesting in going for a win-win solution, both parties feel really good about. Response was usually affirmative. Most people didn't really think it was possible. 327. If I can get the other party to agree, willing to start the process of really communicating with each other, the answer is usually yes. Results in almost every case have been astounding. Problems that have been legally and psychologically wrangled for about months have settled in a matter of a few hours or days. Solutions weren't the courthouse compromise solutions. They were synergistic, better than the solutions proposed independently by either party. In most cases, relationships continued, even though it appeared in the beginning that the trust level was so low and the rupture in the relationship so large as to be irreparable. Next example, development programs, executive reported situation where the manufacturer is being sued by a longtime industrial customer for a lack of performance. Both parties felt totally justified in the rightness of their position, and each perceived the other as unethical and completely untrustworthy. Began to practice habit 5. Two things became clear. First, early communication problems resulted in a misunderstanding that was later exacerbated by accusations and counter-accusations. Second, both were initially acting in good faith and didn't like the cost and hassle of the legal fight, but saw no other way out. In the spirit of habits 4, 5, and 6, it took over, the problem was rapidly resolved and relationship continues to prosper. Another circumstance, early morning phone call from a land developer desperately searching for help. The bank wanted to foreclose because he was not complying with the principal and the interest payment schedule, suing the bank to avoid foreclosure. Needed additional funding to finish market the land. He could repay the bank. The bank refused to provide additional funds until scheduled payments were met. The chicken and the egg problem with undercapitalization. 328. The project was languishing. Streets were beginning to look like weed fields. Owners of the few homes had been built were up in arms as they saw their property values drop. The city was upset over the prime land project falling behind schedule. Tens of thousands of dollars in legal costs the developer had, and the case wasn't scheduled to come to court for several months. The developer reluctantly agreed to try the principles of 4, 5, and 6. He arranged a meeting with even more reluctant bank officials. Meeting started at 8 a.m. The bank conference rooms, tension and mistrust The attorney for the bank had committed the bank officials to say nothing. They were only to listen, and the lawyer would speak. They wanted nothing to happen that would compromise the bank's position in the court. For the first hour and a half, I taught habits 4, 5, and 6. At 9:30, I went to the blackboard and wrote down the bank's concerns based on our prior understanding. The bank officials said nothing. The more we communicated win-win intentions and sought first to understand, the more they opened up to explain and clarify. As they began to feel understood, the whole atmosphere changed, and a sense of momentum or of excitement over prospect of peacefully settling the problem was clearly evident. The bank officials opened up even more about personal concerns. The bank president said, "Do we get our?" So the bank president said, "Do we get our money? What are we going to say?" By 11, the bank officers were so convinced of their rightness, they felt understood and were no longer defensive and officious. Sufficiently open to listening to the developer's concerns, wrote down on the other side of the blackboard, resulted in a deep mutual understanding and a collective awareness of how poor early communication had resulted in misunderstanding and unrealistic expectations. Continuous communications and a win-win spirit could have prevented the subsequent major problems from developing. Shared sense of both chronic and acute pain combined with a sense of genuine progress kept everyone communicating. 3:29. By noon, a meeting was scheduled to end. People were positive, creative, and synergistic and wanted to keep talking. The very first recommendation made by the developer was seen as a beginning win-win approach by all, synergized and improved. 12:45, the developer and the two bank officers left with the plan present together to the homeowners association in the city. The legal fight was aborted and the building project continued to a successful conclusion. So that's great. I'm not suggesting that people should use legal processes. Some situations are absolutely require it. I see court as a last, not first resort. If it's used too early, even in a preventative sense, sometimes fear in the legal paradigm creates subsequent thought and action processes are not synergistic. Okay, so we had some examples there. Next slide. All nature is synergistic. So this does make sense because everything is integrated with itself, right? You can't just take one organism. Yeah, sure.
This is good. I remember there's a movie that's very famous. It's talking about it's like a marriage. It's like two people fall in love, but somehow by accident they want divorce. But then it's regarding a kids, whether the kids belongs to whom, and then they start using lawyers, and then eventually it become a talk between two lawyers, and it ended up costing them a lot more. Because the money actually goes to the lawyer rather than a small issue become a very devastating situation.
Yeah, it's true.
It's called A Marriage Story. It's like winning the Oscar.
What year was the movie?
A couple years ago, just fairly new. It's played by the one her. There's a movie called
Walking Phoenix, isn't it? Or Scarlett Johansson?
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, cool. All right. So all nature is synergistic. Ecology describes the synergy of how everything in nature is related to everything else. Power of the relationship of parts within a synergistic culture or of a family or organization. Synergy is the effectiveness of an interdependent reality within teamwork, team building through the development of unity and creativity with others. Cannot control the paradigms of others. One's internal synergy within one's circle of influence. Respect both your creative and analytical sides. So he's just saying that synergy is an element of nature, and it makes sense for us to incorporate that into our social environment as well, right? Sidestep negative energy by focusing on the good in others and utilizing it. So again, it's being fair and not just, what's the distortion? Not minimization. Maybe you are minimizing the negative elements. Yeah. And you're not focusing fairly on all the properties of an individual. Improve your point of view by increasing your perspective, being synergistic. Exercise courage to be open, express ideas and your feelings, and allow others to interdependently do the same. Affirm others if agreement is unattainable. Strive for a thorough alternative for other options that is a better solution for everyone. So it's just applying this context from nature socially.
So they talk about focusing the good in others. I remember there's a techniques, or what, I don't know what it called, a school of psychology called the NLP.
Yeah.
They also talk about focusing on the good in others. What do you
Okay.
think about NLP? Is it really a scientific or
No.
reliable things?
Yeah, neuro-linguistic programming is that you can like it's a pseudoscience, and it's really overextending the impact of associative learning. That like for classical conditioning or even operant conditioning, classical conditioning, if you say like some color, the person will automatically have an association with that color because of previous associations, and then you can kind of like knit together and lead them towards stuff. So if you try to evoke some positive feeling, you can use that positive feeling in the person to get them to like buy your product. And it's just a pseudoscience. It just doesn't, it's not really a real scientific way to think about things. It's just taking behaviorism too far.
There's a famous book called The Secrets.
Okay.
So a little bit like this. He talk about if you only think about positive things, then the world, will be attracted to you. All the good things will go to you. Yeah. So don't think about negative things. That's the secret of the world.
Yeah, it's the law of affirmation. And the problem with that is it's fundamentally based in wishful thinking. Like every cancer patient really wishes that they didn't have cancer. And a lot of them die because of it. So it's just not, or if someone passes away and you're really affirming that they come back to life, it's not a thing, right? And so we need to be hopeful and have a positive attitude. That's important, but don't believe that your thoughts just automatically change reality. Your thoughts are important to be mindful of them, especially in the context of your mental health and your well-being, but you also need to do action, and those thoughts and action have to be realistic. And David Burns really goes through a lot of that stuff. Okay, ecology is a word that basically, 329, describes the synergism in nature. Everything is related to everything else. In the relationship that creative powers are maximized, the real power is in these 7 habits, is their relationship to each other, not just the individual habits themselves. So that's a good meta point there, right? The relationship of the parts is also the power in creating synergistic culture inside a family or an organization. The more genuine the involvement, the more sincere and sustained the participation in analyzing and solving problems. Greater the release of everyone's creativity, of their commitment to what they create. Essence of the power and the Japanese approach to business. Change the world and the marketplace. Synergy works. It's a correct principle. So he's just saying that. He didn't justify it. I guess he's justified it works in previous examples, which is fine, but they weren't necessarily all anecdotal and there was no study scientifically, but whatever. Crowning achievement of all the previous habits, effectiveness and an interdependent reality, teamwork, team building, the development of unity and creativity with other human beings. You cannot control the paradigms of others in an interdependent interaction or the synergistic process itself. A great deal of synergy is within your circle of influence. Your own internal synergy is completely within the circle. Respect both sides of your own nature, the analytical side, 330, and the creative side. You can value the difference between them and use that difference to catalyze creativity. Be synergistic within yourself, even in the midst of a very adversarial environment. And that's where a lot of this really is stemming from, I would say. You don't have to take insults personally, step aside negative energy, look for the good in others and utilize that good, different as it may be, to improve your point of view and to enlarge your perspective. Exercise the courage in interdependent situations to be open to express your ideas, your feelings, and your experiences in a way that will encourage other people to be open also. Value the difference to other people. When someone disagrees with you, you can say, good, you see it differently. You don't have to agree with them. Simply affirm them, seek to understand. See only 2 alternatives, the false dichotomy again, yours and the wrong one. Look for a synergistic third alternative. There's always other options, not just the third. If you work within a win-win philosophy and really seek to understand, you can usually find a solution that will be better for everyone concerned. Okay, so that was nice. So application suggestions, I wrote down 2 here. Differences may be stepping stones to third alternatives, and list people that irritate you and represent them as differing views leading to synergy. So 330, number 1, think about a person who sees things differently than you. Consider ways in which these differences might be used as stepping stones to other things, other options. Seek out their views on a current project or problem. Valuing their perspective will make it easier for you to understand them. Number 2, make a list of people that irritate you. Represent different views that could lead to synergy if you had greater intrinsic security and valued the difference. So intrinsic security is like your self-esteem. So even though people disagree with me, it doesn't affect what I believe or what I feel about myself. Assuming that their disagreement, just because I'm wrong, it's not a bad thing either, right? If someone says, oh, you miscalculated this, it's better that you show me that I miscalculated it. Number 3, identify a situation in which you desire greater teamwork and synergy. What conditions would need to exist to support synergy? What can you do to create those conditions? Next time you have a disagreement or confrontation with someone, attempt to understand the concerns, understanding that person's position. Address those concerns in a creative and mutually beneficial way.
So Achilles, can you demonstrate, because can you demonstrate an example here? For example, I know you don't believe in God, right?
Sure.
But someone, is religious. Like this suggestion 1, think about a person who typically see things differently than
Sure.
you do. So when you meet with a religious person, they say that they believe in God.
Yeah.
And how do you create synergy with a religious person as being a atheist yourself?
I would say, what does God do for you? Why do you believe in God? And they'd say something like, I don't feel alone, or in times of despair, I feel that I can get through it, or when I am in a serious situation or conflict, I feel it can help me connect with others better. And so I could say all of those things are great, and I don't have to talk about God necessarily to achieve those same ends. I can provide an alternative perspective that you can also have for those same ends, right? And even if someone says, worshiping God is really good for me and it makes me feel good, and I can empathize and say, well, the value of, like, what do you mean by worship? Like, do you mean thinking about God? Do you mean praying? Do you mean being with other people and doing it together? And then we can look at all the properties of those things and still acknowledge the benefits that person gets from it. At the very least, right? That's more of a habit 5 thing to understand them. And I guess for synergy, we have to kind of like put a context here. Like, what does it mean? Like, let's say somebody died, right? And we're going to do a funeral. Well, you could say, well, I don't want to have an atheist funeral. I don't want to not talk about God because God is meaningful to me. It was meaningful to them. It's meaningful to everybody else. So we could say, okay, well, you guys, if you want to have your time talking about God, you can have a moment to speak at the funeral. But then I'm also going to speak at the funeral and not talk about God at all. I'm going to talk about other things. And so you could say that both of those trajectories in the same context of the funeral are good because they meet needs of different people within that context.
So with that spirit, do you think a religious person and a non-religious person can have a successful intimacy relationship?
Yeah, I think that, like, I've dated people that are very religious and I just waste a lot of time. Like, part of it is values. If you just mean like their intimacy and having sex, they could probably do that depending on the religious person's orientation towards sexual activity. But if it comes down to like intimacy as like a very integrated relationship, it depends on your values. I really don't value God, and I don't want to have to spend every day arguing with somebody about why God doesn't exist. It's a waste of time for me. And so my motivations to be like, it's not beneficial to me, right?
So you cannot create a win-win situation?
I'm sorry?
You cannot create a win-win situation here?
Yeah, the win-win would just be date someone who's religious. You're going to be happier with them. You guys are going to be on the same page. And I'll find somebody that doesn't need that as a way to explain every experience in their life. We're just different people, right?
Oh.
You can be friends, but when you say intimacy, like how close? If intimacy is as close as you can get.
Integrated relationship.
Integrity relationship?
When I say intimacy, I mean like a life partner, like integrated relations.
Integrated. Yeah, it's just not for me. That's like, if you're a vegan, are you going to like marry a butcher? No, it just doesn't make sense, right? Like it's
Doesn't mush together.
yeah, I think that when it comes to intimate relationships, there's certain factors like sexual attraction, and then your personality and psychology and values, and then your trajectory and goals in life, right? And if you don't have those things in line, it's like, what is the benefit of this relationship? Because you can just find somebody that is more in line with you, they're more complementary to you. So I think that getting involved in that kind of relationship would be like a lose-lose. It's not good for either person. You could be friends and share whatever capacity of intimacy to a certain degree, but to force each other to, like, that's why I don't like valuing the differences. Like that, for me, conceptually doesn't make sense in this writing, but whatever. Okay, let's look at the insights on habit 6. We have a few more pages to go for this new section that Sean Covey, his son, wrote. And so let's see what Sean Covey has to say. 331. Synergy, studying computer science at Stanford, or Sergey was studying computer science at Stanford University for 2 years. He was assigned to help new students at spring orientation. Show a guy named Larry around the campus. They didn't hit it off right away. This is like a story about these two guys that had differences. They found each other quite obnoxious, disagreed on nearly everything, but eventually they had so much fun contradicting each other on every topic, they became friends. Both Sergey and Larry liked computers. They were total opposites. Sergey was a party guy, Larry was private and reserved. Later worked together as part of Larry's dissertation. They experimented with a new way to search the internet. At that time, you would type in a word into a computer and the internet would spit back how many times the words show up and where. Interesting to search for links, not for words. More often, a website was linked to other websites, the more important it was. Search results came up on your screen in order of importance. New program, Backrub, counted the number of links back to an original website. University's network was nearly shut down. They moved their project to their friend's garage. More than 1 billion people use Backrub, now called Google. Company Larry Page and Sergey Brin started in the dormitory. Two college guys who found on Google rarely agreed on anything. What would happen if they always seen eye to eye? Exactly the same talents, both been alike, introverts or extroverts, needed each other's strengths to build one of the world's greatest companies. Neither could have done it alone. 332. Belief in the third alternative. After working with thousands of organizations, the company Franklin Covey showed how synergy works. It's not just a nice theory or an ideal. Life is a team sport. With the right attitude and skills, you can find synergistic answers to complex problems. Not all the time, most of the time. To find thin alternatives, you have to believe they exist. You have to believe in the idea that by working together, we can find a solution that is better than what either of us had in mind. And again, this is coming with, you have a certain, that's why he says that habits 4 and 5 are necessary first, because if someone's out there to manipulate you and take advantage of you, it doesn't matter, right? But if you have a different view on things, it's like, if I see or if I perceive sonar and you see in the visual light spectrum, we can combine those two sense modalities to have a greater perception of reality. So that's why he says differences is not really the best. That's because he's coming out of an adversarial, like the bank versus the developer context. But it's really just two human beings, or all human beings have their own perspective. And when we combine those perspectives, it's greater. If you don't believe this, then you're thinking synergy is unrealistic and that it is either your way or my way. You'll never master it. A key building block to finding other options, or the third alternative, is to set aside your ego and to acknowledge that you need the collective intelligence of everyone involved to find the best solution. Every individual is smart in different ways, and everyone can contribute. Science is teaching us about how complex a thing intelligence is. Howard Gardner, a psychologist at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, talks about 9 different types of intelligence. Individuals possess one or more of these attributes. Again, intelligence, we have to talk about, there's crystallized intelligence and there's fluid intelligence. And so intelligence in some ways is our ability to detect patterns. And there are different kinds of patterns. And some people might have an instinct to perceive certain kinds of patterns via sense modality, like auditory information, more than others. But at the same time, neuroplasticity would say that if you neurons that fire together wire together. In the past, I had very bad rhythm. I couldn't keep a beat. Now I can play the djembe to tool, which has really intense time signatures. So at one point in my life, you could say my auditory intelligence was very low, but at another point, it was very high. So it's not that you're stuck in either one necessarily. I don't think that's a healthy way to look at it. So there's spatial intelligence, an ability to find oneself in spaces, large and small. Linguistic, our ability with words written and spoken. And there's two fundamental properties of the brain, the Broca's area and how we speak, and Virkanen's area, how we perceive language. Also your prefrontal cortex, where you're understanding and comprehending the meaning of things. Logical and mathematical, ability to deal with logic, numbers, and reasoning. And again, that's a practice like an instrument. You have to practice being mathematical over time to be very good at it. Kinesthetic, coordination, sense of time, and good reflexes, and hand dexterity. So that is in some ways, that plus spatial together is what's necessary for sports. But that could also be for music as well, the kinesthetic. And is also in line with proprioception.
So basically, So basically, he's talking about people possess different skills, different intelligence. I remember a school of psychology. I don't know, it's a pseudo psychology. It's called the MBTI.
Okay.
You heard about it?
The Myers-Briggs stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
How reliable is that one?
It's not. The same person could take the same test and get different results. And it's not very accurate either. So when you think you're measuring certain personality traits, but you're not really measuring them. The 5-factor model is a much better. The Myers-Briggs model was based off of a Jungian psychology, and it's not the way that the test is designed is not concrete enough to distill out properties of your personality that are real. Whereas the 5-factor model is a better way to assess personality.
Okay.
Which is different than intelligence. These are two different things. Intelligence is your brain's capacity to, and like I said, perceive patterns in some way, whereas personality is the way you interact in situations over time.
Because in the previous example of the Google founder, they use the word introversion or extroversion.
Yeah.
Because that's what typically MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, the first, they call people like you are EBT, ENTJ, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's actually I actually heard this introvert extrovert from that. So you think the introvert extrovert is also not reliable?
No, it is. Introvert and extrovert is one of the oldest traits. Like it runs throughout, like from Jung all the way, maybe even Freud too, but I don't remember Freud really talking about Jung for sure. Freud talks about hysteria and the id, ego, and superego, and the unconscious and the conscious, and he talks about the pleasure principle and the depth drive, and there's a bunch of things going on there. But Jung looked at these different properties of our personality and then kind of mapped them out. And then the founders of Myers-Briggs, they took that and developed an assessment tool that's not the best. We have better assessment tools now, like the MMPI is the Minnesota Multi Personality Inventory. Okay. Musical, sensitivity to sounds, tones, rhythms, and pitch. Interpersonal, sensitivity to others' moods and motives. Ability to cooperate, get along, and be team players. Intrapersonal, ability to self-reflect and decipher one's own feelings. Naturalist, ability to make consequential distinctions in the natural world among animals, plants, clouds, and other configurations. Existential, tendency to raise big questions about life and a search for answers. So he's broken up these different, traits or whatever, instead of just having like just the crystallized or the fluid intelligence. 333, another building block to find third alternatives is conversation. We must learn to communicate with one another, brainstorm, talk through issues, bounce ideas off each other, and go back to the drawing board again and again. Wilbur and overall Wright never invented the airplane without a great deal of discussion and through thorough valuing of each other's differences, each other's opinions or perspectives. Differences inherently has this adversarial element in it. Before his death, Wilbur made the statement, nearly everything was done in our lives has been the result of conversations, suggestions, and discussion between us. At a local TV station, news and sales department are often in conflict. Case with the meteorologist Travis Koshoko, his TV station was able to find other options to a conflict through healthy communication and brainstorming. So here's like a little letter from this Kosho guy. My television station did a 3-degree guarantee, incentivized incorrect temperature forecasts. Every time I missed the previous day forecast by more than 3 degrees, we'd give away a small prize from the segment sponsor. 10 years of doing this segment, contest was becoming stale. Number of viewers signing up for the contest kept decreasing. Weren't missing with the forecast high very often. Great in terms of our forecasting reputation, never gave anything away. Number of viewers signing up for the contest eventually dropped off near zero. Contest was failing in terms of sponsor exposure and viewer interest. Cancel the entire segment, our account executive, to keep maintaining revenue for the station. So he approached his manager with a new idea. Why not restructure the contest to a lottery format? Start with a small jackpot, $19, and every day we forecasted within 3 degrees, we'd add another $5 to the jackpot. We'd give away the entire jackpot when we were off by more than 3 degrees. The jackpot would then restart at $19. Continue incentive for us to be accurate, for people to sign up for the contest as the prize increased. The first thing I noticed was his manager was totally open, 334, my idea, and really liked it. It's weird to say he was open to my influence. Like, that's just, I don't like that. It has this like coercive nature to it, you know? We then worked to redefine and polish the idea so that it met everyone's needs. It didn't take long for our contest to become a big success. The number of people who signed up for it skyrocketed. We had 41 consecutive correct days, the largest ever jackpot. Easy to let the contest flounder and to lose valuable opportunity. Create a different idea or alternative. Everyone involved ended up a winner. Maintain my reputation as an accurate meteorologist. Complementary teams. Complaining about my boss on one occasion. Sure, he has weaknesses just as you do. Don't build your emotional life around the weaknesses of another person. Instead, run with their strengths and try to compensate for their weaknesses. Complement them. Put this into practice himself. Start a Covey Leadership Center. Assume the role of CEO. Realize very quickly, I'm not good at this. I'm a teacher. Hire great people around him who could bring the executive leadership skills to complement him without his ego being threatened. Greatest example of synergy, his dad's life, Stephen Covey, between him and his mom. They're very different in their backgrounds and approach to life. His mom was raised in humble circumstances. His mom's dad was a high school history teacher. His dad raised in a more prosperous environments. They were rich. Frugality was sometimes a point of contention. Dad came to appreciate his mother's worldview, 335, and how it complemented it instead of conflicted with his. Taught him that there was a middle ground better than what they individually had in mind. They communicated well, they could get there. Without my mother, I don't think my father would come to understand synergy. Dad's renown grew. Mother said, it wasn't your best speech. You were too serious, too many diagrams. People want to hear stories. Encouraged Dad to be less complicated, to smile more, and to be more personal. He came to value her feedback. She saw things differently. Synergy with customers. Interpersonal synergy. Find striking examples of the power of creative collaboration among industries, stakeholders, and customers. So, for example, Legos. The corporation fascinated him. Most trusted companies in the world. Strength is synergy with their customers. Since 1949, Lego has created and released the Star Wars collection. Adults who are children at heart, let them design their own sets and order pieces if they need it online. Lego created a free software product called Lego Digital Designer. Users created software hacks for Lego's computer systems, stealthily rewriting the program code so that rather than order pallets of bricks with only a few bricks they may need, see an inventory of each pallet and save money by getting fewer bricks they didn't need. Lego caught on, recognized the value of letting these customers adapt their software to their own needs. 336, saw what the loyal fans wanted and let them have it, ultimately fit Lego's larger plan. Lego hoped that its fans would make the designs their own and even perhaps come up with ideas Lego could use. The spirit of synergy. Lego stepped back and listened to the hackers, seeking first to understand and valuing the difference of opinion. So that's great, because they could have like taken like a legal approach and like caused harm to these people that were tampering with their system, but they saw that the people valued what they were the product they were giving, and they integrated the actual feedback of their use to make a better service. So that's great. Getting to synergy. Synergy doesn't just happen, because again, products and services are supposed to meet the needs of people. The needs of people are not supposed to meet products and services, right? Synergy doesn't just happen. You have to get there. Not sure where to start. Here's a simple 5-step process. So that's great. Number 1, define the problem or opportunity. Number 2, their way. Seek first to understand the ideas of others. Number 3, my way. Seek to understand by sharing your ideas. Number 4, brainstorm, create new options and ideas. Number 5, highway. Find the best solution. Colleague of mine got to synergy with her family around how to use their Saturdays. All 5 of these steps were followed. So there's a little letter. Saturdays, spending time together, building family relationships. Husband would say, why we have Saturdays? My answer is very different. Saturdays are for catching up on cleaning and doing projects around the house, finishing my to-do list. Kids do not like my philosophy. We battled almost every Saturday. Next paragraph, tunnel vision when I got onto a project. Hard time letting it enough be enough and being done. Next page. So there's a dialogue here. Do something outside first thing in the morning. Then the wife would say, housework has to be done. Get started early. The husband says, make a list of what actually needs to be done and let's take a look at it. The wife says, hands in the list. The husband says, half of that could be done in a few hours. The kids, do you think the kids will really last long enough to actually help? No, we need a new plan. So the husband says, since it's going to be cooler in the morning, above 105 degrees, what if we take some time to go to the park, grab some pop, and then come home and do the chores that are most important? So they woke up on Saturday morning, got ready to go to the park. Kids were thrilled, played for about an hour, walked around the park, played with the kids. When they got hot, they went and got a drink. Then they came home and they did the chores. Showed the kids a to-do list. There was little complaining. Happy now with what we call Synergy Saturdays. Synergy is the ultimate habit, the culmination of all previous habits, which doesn't 100% make sense. It does, but habit 7, you would think, is the culmination of all the habits. The reward or the delicious fruit of effective living. I think it's better to say, so that's the end. I think it's better to say that synergy exists as the pinnacle of the building of all the other habits. But necessarily habit 7 is the integration because you're kind of going through them again, you know? So there we go. We finished habit 6.
9:15. Oh my gosh. We did it in an hour.
Well, there wasn't really that much. So let's just look back at this diagram here, right? That's page, like on this one specifically, I guess it's page 339. So we have going from dependence, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, put first things first. That's us being successful with ourselves. Then once we do that, we're independent as people. Then we shift to public victory, which is in a social context, where we're going to think win-win, everybody gets something that they want. And then we're going to be empathetic, seek first to understand, then be understood. And then we're going to do this, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and integrate all of our perspectives for a larger perspective. And that's the notion of interdependence. And then lastly, this little circle around this whole thing is called sharpen the saw, which basically just means that you go back through the whole book, which is fine. I went through this book several times. And you get a sense of how to integrate all of the habits again, all over again, right? And so I will not be going through the book again for a long time because I just spent a year going through it. And that's fine. I have the videos online so anybody can go through them again. And yeah, and so I think we're making good progress. So next time that we go through this book will be habit 7, sharpen the saw, principles of balanced self-renewal. I am still finishing reading this chapter again and then getting the slides together. So I think that next week is movie time. Will you be here?
Yep.
Okay.
What movie?
We're going to watch Gattaca, finally.
No, I watched it. I like it. Yeah.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
It's really good.
Cool.
You've seen it, Dave?
No.
Oh,
You need to make sure this thing
it's
don't
this
work.
one here. This one doesn't work, but this one works. But you can bring yours as a backup too,
I can do it.
right? Just as a thing.
So I do have some just a question about the one that they share a great example. There's a lot of wisdom about the clean do the course and the going outside of the park. This is what I call wisdom. They're able to you call it synergy or whatever. One of my example is I found that I'll be more effective to for example to read my philosophy book on the metro or one time at the Apple store when I have to wait in line. I don't have any other option rather than just read the books. But if I have a large amount of time by myself, then I found that maybe at home or even, I found that it's very difficult to concentrate. So actually, the most effective a way for me to do my reading this difficult thing is when I was at the subway, where I have nothing to dilute my attention. So what can you say a little from the psychological analysis? Why is that? Why human being? We have a better reading result when we sometimes went to the toilet. Some people rather than just oh, you have a nice environment, then sometimes you just couldn't focus. Why is that?
So it's similar to state dependent memory or like environment dependent memory. So when people, if they get really used, so there's two examples. One for state dependent memory is if you're drunk and you always play pool when you're drunk, you're actually better at playing pool when you're drunk than when you're sober. The other thing is that when we look at addictions, people will, if they do a drug in a specific environment and they're used to doing it, their tolerance increases because of the place that they're in. And if they go to a new environment to do the same amount of drug, they can OD. Super intense situation, right? And so what I believe is that if you are in an environment where you're used to like relaxing and sleeping, it's a different kind of activity to be engaged with material and to be studying that material. So what you want to do is have like a place in your apartment when you sit there, the only thing you do is study or read, and at specific times. So your circadian rhythm or your activity cycle is in line with that. And initially you're going to be developing a new habit, because you've discussed before in the evenings, I have time, but I'm too tired to read. If you just start a little bit, like if you go into the book and you just like read one sentence, and then can I read another one? Yes. And you just slowly get through it at the same time in the same place every day, you're more likely to follow through with that habit in the future, and you'll feel motivated. Motivation comes after, which is this internal drive towards some action. You have to train yourself to do it without the motivation. You have to be able to think it to build new habits, and then do it without feeling like doing it. If you can get over that. At the beginning of this chapter, he talks about how I think it was begin with the end in mind. He talks about how, or maybe it's proactive. When the Apollo 13 was leaving Earth, there was more energy expended in like the first 30 seconds or minute than the entire trip. And it was very, very far. So it's an analogy to habits, that in the initial building time of habit, it takes a lot of effort. But once you've built the habit after like 21 days or whatever, then it's easier for you. And so so part of it is when you're on the subway, you've developed a habit to do this. That environment is created that, because you could also just meditate or look at your phone or listen to music, and you chose to be constructive in some ways and read, but you can also make another time too. And I think it's important that when you're thinking about this, you can know initially it's going to be challenging, and then prepare yourself for that. Today, have a self-talk that's encouraging and realistic. This is going to be difficult for me. I'm not used to doing it. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes focused, even though it's challenging, knowing that next time it'll be a little bit easier.
So, that's good. I also remember, I sometimes I will read like, outside of the emergency room of the hospital, because what I saw, those people are suffering, whatever, that receive medical treatment, I feel I'm so lucky. Then I'm so lucky to be able to read. Then I have the force I need to read the difficult material. So like in the hospital, like I just couldn't do that at home, like a comfortable home. It's almost like I have some, like, I don't know, like a habit of receiving torture, or I don't know, how do you call that? So yeah.
Well, I think you're just putting yourself in environments like, it's just, like you need to have a space in your room which is like a mentally activated space. It's not like a calming space, like where you're tired and sleepy and relaxed. You need to have like a workspace where it's bright and you're sitting down in like an upright position and you can, where you're awake, and you're more likely to be successful reading and studying in that context. You're just creating these environments where you're like, you have no other option. You know, you're forced to study. You can do that too. It's fine. But it is possible for you to find that in your own like living quarters. It's easier too, because you don't have to go anywhere. The bathroom's right there, the food right there, your phone's there. It's easy. So it's just structuring the habit for yourself. You know, that's just once you figure that out, you're fine. Okay, I think that's good for today. So next week we're going to do Gattaca. So I'm going to post some information on the thing. We're going to watch it in the room. And then I guess that could be our potluck too.
Yeah.
If we want. I guess we'll just bring snacks. We'll go from there. Okay, thank you, David. I will see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye,
Natasha.
David.
Bye. Have a good, safe trip back.
Thank you.